Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're stepping into, well, a really important and often unspoken area: how the absence of a father profoundly shapes a daughter's inner world.
Hmm.
You brought Susan E. Schwartz's book, The Absent Father Effect on Daughters, to our attention, sort of curious about the lasting impact of those complex family dynamics. So, yeah, that's our focus today.
Right. And Schwartz, she brings this really unique perspective. She's both a Jungian analyst and a clinical psychologist.
Okay.
And she explores what she calls the psychic damage that can result from an emotionally absent and deadened father.
Deadened. That's a strong word.
It is. Her work uses a Jungian lens, so she's looking at things like these inner father complexes and the powerful sort of universal patterns we call
That's
archetypes,
right, the archetype.
and also the symbolic language that comes up in our dreams.
Fascinating.
And Andrew Samuels, who's, really respected voice in this field, he called her work truly something new and original. And he emphasized that it has something relevant to, well, every woman and the majority of men. So quite broad applicability.
Exactly. And what we want to do today is really pull out the crucial insights from Schwartz's work for you, the listener.
Hmm.
Our aim is to give you a clear, understandable picture of this complex dynamic. We'll look at some perhaps unexpected aspects, use examples that hopefully resonate
Yeah.
without getting lost in, overly academic jargon. We're going to explore this intriguing idea of father desire, what's meant by the dead father effect, how a negative father complex can take root,
Right.
and this fascinating concept of the as-if personality.
Hmm.
Okay, so let's unpack this first thing. What exactly does father absence mean here? It sounds like more than just someone not being physically there.
You've hit on a key point right away.
Yeah.
Schwartz is very clear. Father absence isn't just physical distance.
Oh.
It includes a father's emotional unavailability, a lack of nurturing, really, of his daughter's emotional life, and her sense of inherent value.
So like not seeing her, truly seeing her.
Exactly.
Mm.
And when that kind of engagement is missing, it can leave a daughter feeling this deep, persistent emptiness.
Mm.
She might struggle with, that fundamental human need to form secure attachments
Mm-hmm.
and also to develop a healthy, solid sense of her own independence.
Mm.
Often this comes with negative self-talk, a tendency to blame herself,
Oh, wow.
and real uncertainty about her own ability to just be her own person.
So it's almost like being invisibly tied to this absence, even if it's not a physical one.
That's a very insightful way to put it, yeah. Schwartz describes it quite powerfully, actually, as being imprisoned with the absent father, remaining in a kind of unconscious state about the profound impact it's having.
Right.
And this early disturbance, well, it can unfortunately set a pattern where the daughter might find herself not only pushing away her father, but also perhaps struggling in relationships with other men, and even having difficulty connecting with the full spectrum of both masculine and feminine aspects within herself.
And she introduces this idea of the parallax perspective.
Yeah.
What's the significance of looking at things from that angle?
Right, the parallax. Think of it like when you look at an object from two different viewpoints and it seems to shift its position.
Okay, yeah.
Schwartz uses this idea to say that when we look at father absence from multiple angles, we can start to see what she calls the grimmer perspectives more clearly.
Your perspectives.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, this isn't about just focusing on the negative, It's more about sparking a sense of self-assertion and giving the daughter the impetus to actively create her own life, to sort of break free from what she terms the fetters and the devitalizing depression that can come with this absence.
Okay.
So the key takeaway here is, by seeing the situation in its fullness, even the painful parts, it can become a catalyst for change.
It's about getting a clearer, more complete picture, maybe, even if it's uncomfortable, to help move forward.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Because the absence of a father can really impact how a daughter takes in and processes the collective, psychological and social norms that shape her identity.
Right, the bigger picture stuff.
Yeah. When that father figure isn't there as a point of connection or even healthy opposition, the frustration and anger she might feel don't have an obvious outward target. And they can often turn inward, directed at herself.
Ooh.
And Schwartz emphasizes that for many daughters, facing this internalized anger also means confronting broader societal, cultural messages that might inadvertently reinforce these feelings of disillusionment and betrayal.
Wow.
It's this layering of personal and societal influences that makes it just So complex.
It's a really intricate interplay then, isn't it? Individual experience and wider social forces. And even with this absence, the father still occupies a significant space in the daughter's mind.
Oh, absolutely. Schwartz points out that often, beneath any feelings of anger or resentment towards the absent father, there's a deep and fundamental desire for love.
Hmm.
This desire can paradoxically become a kind of fixation, almost holding the daughter captive to the figure of the absent father in her mind.
Even though he's not there.
Right. And interestingly, this pull can sometimes be even stronger when the father hasn't actively offered connection or welcomed the daughter into his life.
That's counterintuitive.
It is, isn't it?
Mm.
So even when he's not there physically or emotionally, and perhaps even more so because of that, he remains a powerful and significant figure in her internal landscape.
That naturally leads us into this core theme of loss and longing. It sounds like the past really casts a long shadow here.
It absolutely does. Our past experiences, well, they inevitably shape how we perceive and interpret what's happening now
Yeah.
and how we react emotionally. Schwartz notes that some women might have early memories of their father where he seemed loving,
Right,
attentive.
maybe brief moments?
Exactly. And this can lead to a powerful idealized image. Often this idealization is a form of projection,
Mm.
a way of filling the void created by his later absence or emotional unavailability. The daughter essentially creates an image of the father she deeply longed for. So for you, the listener, it's about how those early, maybe incomplete memories can color your entire perception.
So there's this really difficult process then of trying to separate that idealized image from the reality of the absence.
Exactly. Untangling these psychological knots, as Schwartz aptly calls them, it's rarely straightforward.
I bet.
It involved navigating this complex web of internal divisions, distortions, unresolved conflicts, and those deep, persistent longings.
Mm.
Some daughters, maybe in an attempt to cope, become what Schwartz terms dutiful daughters.
Dutiful daughters.
Yeah, essentially suppressing their own needs and desires, almost becoming like shadows, just going through the motions of life, obliterating themselves, she says.
Wow. You mentioned an example in the book, a woman named Jade. Her experience really brings this into focus, doesn't it?
Yes, Jade. She presented this image of, like, outward competence, very polished, yet she admitted having no real close connections. Her partner was distant, family relationships felt chaotic, and she had very little connection with her father, who left when she was quite young.
Right.
When she reconnected with him in her teens, all those years of repressed longing for a father figure just suddenly surged up.
Oh, intense.
Very intense. She had this powerful feeling that he must feel the same way, that they'd have this instant connection.
Yeah.
But he didn't reciprocate her enthusiasm, which led to just immense disappointment.
Ouch.
So the key insight here for you is how that unmet longing can create these powerful and often totally unrealistic expectations.
It sounds like she had built up this huge expectation that the reunion would magically fill that long-standing void.
Absolutely. And Schwartz highlights how Jade, even when describing her father's absence, seemed to downplay it.
Really?
Yeah, she'd focus on the few times he said something that suggested he cared. She was caught in this internal conflict, wanting things to be okay, but also sensing a deeper, unacknowledged pain.
Mm.
Over time, Jade gradually lost her sense of self. Schwartz describes this as a secret psychic death
Oh.
that can begin in childhood when a child feels unloved and unseen. That internal sense of gravity, that feeling of I-ness, it becomes weakened and damaged. So for you, it's worth considering how these early experiences might subtly impact your own sense of self-worth.
And this longing, this intense desire for something distant or unattainable, it seems to be a really central emotion in this whole dynamic.
It is. Longing, as Schwartz defines it, is this powerful, persistent desire that's deeply rooted in those early relational wounds with the absent father.
Right.
Dependency needs are unmet, and the daughter might start to feel like there's no point in hoping or even imagining a different reality.
Mm.
In Jade's case, with very little real connection to her personal father, she coped by adopting collective standards and ideas, becoming almost a daughter of the broader patriarchal structure. Other women might withdraw emotionally or adopt a fiercely independent stance as a way of dealing with this unmet need. So think about how that feeling of longing might manifest in different ways for different people.
And dreams. Dreams can offer us a glimpse into this longing, can't they?
They certainly can. Jade, for instance, had this recurring dream of being trapped inside a mechanistic painting,
Okay.
unable to reach the man she loved. This dream significantly was devoid of color, and it left her with these strong feelings of frustration, longing, and lovelessness when she woke up.
Wow.
Schwartz points out that longing is often accompanied by other intense emotions:
Hmm.
shame, anger, terror, a profound sense of aloneness.
Yeah.
It's this deep ache in the soul, really, that arises from that primal human need for inclusion, acceptance,
But
love.
is there any upside?
Well, and this is important, this longing, even though it's painful, can also be a powerful catalyst for transformation if it's acknowledged and understood.
Okay, so it's not just a dead end.
Not necessarily.
So, the father's absence doesn't just create an empty space. It actively shapes the daughter's inner world, her emotional landscape.
Precisely.
Oh.
Fathers play such a crucial role in emotional development, well-being.
Right.
And without that consistent emotional interplay, the absence creates this powerful, energetic force that drives the daughter to try and fill that lack somehow.
Mm-hmm.
However, this search can be fraught with challenges, sometimes leading to denial of her own needs or even an unconscious identification with the father.
Identifying with the absence?
In a way, yeah, incorporating his own failures and anxieties. The therapeutic process, as Schwartz described it, often involves carefully untangling these enigmatic, sometimes quite frightening experiences
Right.
in order to understand the profound and lasting impact of the father's absence on the very structure of the daughter's psyche.
Let's move on to this idea of father desire and father wounds. The title itself really highlights that connection, doesn't it? Between wanting that paternal presence and the pain that comes when it's not there or it's damaging.
Exactly. Schwartz begins this chapter with a very powerful and somewhat tragic story from the Bible,
Oh.
the story of Jephthah and his daughter. It highlights a father who seems tragically unaware of his daughter's inner life and ultimately makes this devastating choice that profoundly impacts her.
Gosh.
This story really sets the stage for exploring this fundamental desire for a father's gaze, his acknowledgement, his active presence in a daughter's life.
You mentioned the father days. What does that specifically entail here?
The father gaze, in this context, it speaks to that really fundamental need to be seen, acknowledged, truly valued by one's father.
Mm-hmm.
Desire, Schwartz notes, often comes hand in hand with an image.
Yeah.
But what happens when a father doesn't provide that mirroring, doesn't offer that reflection?
Yeah, what then?
One woman she talks about described the profound emptiness it creates. Years spent searching for something to fill that void.
Mm-hmm.
The persistent feeling of insecurity in relationships, recurring pain after each departure of someone significant.
Oh, that's tough.
Yeah. The absence of a father, often stemming from his own lack of engagement with his inner life, his forgotten dreams, his reluctance to explore his own psychology.
Right.
It leaves the daughter with these really profound questions. Why didn't he keep me in mind? Was I somehow a threat to him?
Wow.
So for you, the listener, it might be worth considering the impact of feeling unseen or unacknowledged in your own life.
It raises these really deep questions about the father's own internal world and how that then impacts the daughter's sense of self.
Absolutely. A father's devotedness,
Yeah.
his active, loving engagement, it triggers a really crucial relational setup of needs and desires
Okay.
that's absolutely fundamental for the daughter to develop a healthy psychological self. The emotional input from the father figure experienced as love, relatedness, consistent support contributes directly to the daughter's embodied sense of who she is in the world.
And dreams, once again, provide a powerful way to illustrate these father wounds, don't they? You mentioned a dream of Raylan's that really stood out.
Yes, Raylan. She dreamt of going to school in St. Louis, which was also the name of her deceased father.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. The dream revealed her father as someone who never really listened to her when she pleaded for attention, showed very little sign of genuinely caring about her.
Mm.
This dream had a startling effect on her. It made her recognize that this emotionally absent figure still had a significant hold on her psyche.
Wow.
It almost served as a warning, highlighting that she was in danger of becoming like him internally, underscoring the powerful psychological presence an absent or deceased father can still exert. So for you, it's a reminder that even those no longer physically present can still have a profound impact on our inner lives.
So St. Louis in the dream wasn't just a place, it symbolized something much deeper, more personal.
Precisely. Schwartz interprets St. Louis being located in the center of the U.S. as representing Raylan's own center, a very prominent position in her inner world that was occupied by this negative inner father figure. The dream powerfully underscored the urgent need for Raylan to understand this dynamic that was working against her.
Right.
This psychologically incestuous marriage, as Schwartz calls it, to an internalized, self-centered, ultimately disinterested father that was essentially eroding her own sense of being, creating this persistent low-level depression.
It's a really stark and powerful image, isn't it? How the absent father can transform into this really damaging internal presence that continues to affect you.
It is, and Schwartz emphasizes that the process of healing from these father wounds requires a deep, often challenging inner process of recognizing the full breadth and depth of the damage done.
Yeah.
Luigi Zoggia, another insightful Jungian analyst, poignantly stated that the father has often disappeared and died, mostly at home,
Mostly at home.
not in some dramatic external event like war or at work, really highlighting the insidious, often invisible nature of emotional absence and its impact.
You mentioned another of Raylan's dreams that further illuminated these deep-seated wounds.
Yes, in a later dream, Raylan saw a father figure torturing a child.
Oh, gosh.
And this was followed by disturbing images of devouring wolf-like animals.
Mm.
Then, this same father figure reappeared as a grandfather, telling his granddaughter about the awful father he himself had escaped,
Okay.
and even writing a book about it, emphasizing the possibility of creating something meaningful, even from past torture and pain.
Right.
This dream was incredibly helpful for Raylan because it allowed her to finally recognize the devouring harm she had felt from her own father,
Mm.
a legacy of emotional cruelty that she had previously tried to minimize or ignore.
Mm-hmm.
So for you,
Yeah.
it highlights how dreams can sometimes reveal truths we've been unwilling or unable to consciously acknowledge.
It sounds like she had to really confront the difficult reality of his negative impact on her, even though it was undoubtedly a painful process.
Precisely. She came to realize that her father, even when physically present at times, was fundamentally emotionally absent and unkind, offering no real sense of attachment or genuine interest in her as a person. He was, in a very real sense, an absent presence in her life,
Absent presence.
leaving behind a persistent residue of apprehension and anxiety. Schwartz concludes that this fundamental search for the father, the lost object of love and connection, is inextricably linked to the daughter's deeper desire to truly know and understand herself.
Mm-hmm.
The process of gently opening these old wounds, however painful, is often a crucial and necessary part of the path towards self-discovery and healing.
This leads us to the concept of mirroring in the dead father effect. The term dead father is quite striking, maybe unsettling. What does Schwartz specifically mean by that?
Yeah, dead father. As Schwartz clarifies, it doesn't necessarily refer to a literal death,
Okay.
but rather to a state of emotional deadness, a paternal depression or profound emotional unavailability that can be, often unconsciously, transferred from the father to the daughter.
Transferred, wow.
Yeah. This emotional absence casts this long, pervasive shadow in the daughter's psyche, those aspects of herself that remain undeveloped, unseen, essentially ignored.
Hmm.
This can manifest in various ways, like persistent restless anxiety, bouts of depression, an overall sense that significant parts of herself are somehow inaccessible, shut off.
Right.
The attachment formed around this absent figure can, paradoxically, leave her feeling like she shouldn't want too much, shouldn't express too much, shouldn't aim too high. So for you, it's about recognizing how someone else's emotional state can have a profound, often unseen impact on your own.
So the father's emotional state, even if it's one of withdrawal or numbness, has this really profound mirroring effect on the daughter's own emotional landscape.
Exactly. And this internalized dead father figure, even if the daughter consciously tries to idealize him,
Mm-hmm.
can lead to a really debilitating sense of insecurity. The daughter might unconsciously take on his wounded places, his feelings of inadequacy or hopelessness,
Oh,
almost as a way to try and reconstitute the lost unity with him, even if that means adopting a similarly deadened or restricted approach to her own life and potential.
you shared a dream of Grace's that really powerfully exemplified this dead father effect in action.
Yes, Grace. She dreamt of this very impersonal, almost mechanical, claw-like machine
Okay.
that was systematically dunking lifeless dummies into the water. Each time they emerged, they were shrunken, had a ghoulish appearance.
Yikes.
In the dream, she herself then got in line
Mm.
and was being dunked, realizing with this growing panic that she didn't understand what was happening or how to escape.
Oh, terrifying.
Yeah. She strongly associated this unsettling dream with the profound lack of guidance and emotional presence from her own father,
Mm-hmm.
whom she had unconsciously learned to please without even realizing the cost to herself. Her father, while not literally a machine, was emotionally very mechanical, often preoccupied, distant, generally unrelated to her emotional needs. So the key takeaway for you here is how those early, seemingly passive parental behaviors can create deeply ingrained patterns of compliance.
And it sounds like this pattern she experienced with her father tragically repeated itself in her adult romantic relationships.
Sadly, it did. Her marriage mirrored this very same dynamic. Her husband, while not quiet and withdrawn like her father, also suffered from significant psychological depressions, unstable emotions.
Mm.
Grace found herself desperately trying to rescue him, subconsciously reenacting her earlier attempts to connect with her emotionally absent father.
Oh, man.
And in this process of trying to fix her husband, she became increasingly diminished, emotionally depleted herself. No matter what she did, it seemed neither her father nor her husband truly saw or considered her own needs and feelings.
Wow.
The machine in the dream powerfully symbolized this unconscious line of compliance, this automatic mechanical deadening of her own spirit that mirrored her early relationship and ultimately threatened to drown her within her marriage.
It's a really powerful, sobering illustration of how these early relational patterns can play out in our adult lives without us even fully realizing it. And Schwartz also touches on Andre Green's concept of a representation of the absence of representation. That's quite a complex phrase. What does it really mean here?
Right, it is a bit complex. Think of it this way. It refers to how the father and his image in the daughter's mind become this unspoken void,
Okay.
a blank space from which the daughter instinctively tries to glean information about herself and the world. But because it's an absence, a lack of real presence or engagement, she's essentially trying to understand a figure that isn't truly represented in her inner world.
Ah, I see.
This convoluted process can hinder her development of a clear understanding of herself and others because she's constantly trying to make sense of a non-entity.
Right.
As a result, a daughter might react by becoming the opposite of what she perceives her father to be. Or she might cling to a fragmented, preserved part of him in an attempt to deny the full extent of his lack, inadvertently creating space within herself for destructive inner figures to take hold. So for you, it's about how the unsaid and the absent can sometimes have the loudest, most damaging impact.
Let's move on to the idea of the bad dad and the development of a negative father complex. This seems to directly address the more overtly damaging aspects of a father's absence or negative presence.
Exactly. The negative father complex arises from direct experiences of absence, neglect, even outright abandonment.
Mm.
And it can profoundly undermine a daughter's sense of confidence and self-worth. It often leads to a pattern of idealizing others while simultaneously crippling her own ability to assert herself, take initiative, believe in her own capabilities.
Mm.
Schwartz describes this complex as a deeply ingrained network of pathways rooted in those early childhood wounds and relational failures. Crucially, it often operates largely unconsciously, compelling the daughter to remain unaware of her true self, her feelings, her own potential. So for you, it's about recognizing that these early negative experiences can create deeply ingrained patterns that might be influencing you even now.
And this complex can manifest in some really self-destructive ways, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. It can lead to a range of difficulties.
Mm.
Denial of one's own needs, persistent feelings of confusion, self-sabotaging behaviors, emotional numbing as a way to cope with the pain, and a fundamental struggle to find her own authentic voice or a clear, positive sense of her own womanhood.
Wow.
The more severe and unaddressed the wounds from the father's absence, the more autonomous and deeply entrenched these negative complexes can become in the daughter's psyche.
You shared a dream of Kaylee's that really vividly highlighted this negative father complex in action.
Yes, Kaylee. Even after her father's passing, she found herself still locked in mental arguments with him.
Still.
Yeah. While simultaneously living in fear of his memory, his potential judgment, she desperately longed for him to have been a kinder, more supportive figure.
Understandable.
Yet she couldn't fully understand the dark, persistent hold he still had on her psyche. The fiercely independent persona she presented to the world actually masked this deep-seated sense of helplessness and almost paradoxical overdependence on the very father who had been emotionally absent and often critical, keeping her in a kind of emotional infancy.
Right.
This intense internal conflict manifested in various self-destructive behaviors, including impulsively smashing her own artwork, struggling in intimate relationships, and her career. So for you, it's worth noting how, even in absence, a critical parental figure can continue to exert a powerful negative influence.
It really sounds like his absent presence still had a very tangible and damaging impact on her life even after he was gone.
Precisely. Kaylee, like many others in similar situations, had learned to live with a constant sense of constraint and had become emotionally desensitized as a way to cope.
Mm.
Paradoxically, she often only truly felt alive in moments of crisis.
Yeah.
Her attempts to define herself, her own path, were constantly frustrated by this powerful, overshadowing father figure
Right.
who would become an exaggerated and relentlessly critical in her presence, constantly undermining her sense of worth. Even her conscious efforts toward self-care, like meditation, yoga, couldn't fully quiet the underlying anxiety and compulsive negative thoughts fueled by this deeply ingrained negative complex.
And Cassie's dream offered another really important perspective on the negative father complex, particularly highlighting the impact of, like, the emotional coldness of an absent or detached father.
Yes, Cassie.
Mm.
She dreamt of this disturbing scene involving scorpions infesting her absent father's house,
Scorpions. Okay.
combined with cold and dismissive male professors telling her to go into a dark, isolated room and stay there.
Jeez.
Despite initially complying, she became increasingly terrified, felt a desperate need to escape, realizing with a jolt that there was absolutely no one there who would help her.
Oh.
Upon waking, she didn't immediately connect the cold professors with her actual father, who she consciously described as cold, emotionally unrelated, unsupportive, dismissive of her feelings.
Right.
Her surprisingly flat emotional response to the dream itself also indicated a degree of unconsciousness regarding the depth of the hurt she'd experienced from this forbidding man,
Mm-hmm.
who was often both physically and emotionally absent, taking unexplained trips without real communication, leaving her constantly feeling like she was walking on eggshells, fearing his often cruel disapproval.
Yeah.
Even though she still harbored a yearning for his approval, he showed hardly any real interest in her life or experiences. So for you, this highlights how a parent's emotional distance can create a pervasive inner world of fear and constant underlying trepidation.
It's a really chilling portrayal, isn't it? How a father's emotional distance and lack of engagement can create this inner world of fear and constant underlying trepidation for a daughter. Let's shift our focus now to the father archetypal dynamics, symbols, and images. How do these more abstract union concepts relate to the very personal experience of having an absent father?
Right. Jungian psychology proposes that the father archetype, which represents the Yang principle, plays a significant role in shaping our relationship to concepts like authority, law, reason, spirit, our connection to nature.
Okay.
It implies the need for boundaries, structure, a sense of groundedness. Historically, across cultures, this archetype has often been portrayed as powerful, sometimes authoritarian.
Like a king figure.
Exactly, a ruler or king,
Right.
frequently associated with sky imagery, spiritual or intellectual principles, or the figure of the wise old man.
Right.
Interestingly, even when a daughter doesn't have a present personal father, her imaginative experiences of a father figure, her attachments to other significant men, can sometimes, but not always, fulfill some of these archetypal needs.
Hmm.
However, as Schwartz's examples illustrate, this isn't universal.
Yeah.
So for you, it's about recognizing there's this inherent, almost built-in expectation or understanding of the father figure within the psyche, even if your personal experience doesn't fully align.
So even without a physically or emotionally present father, there's still this almost inherent understanding or expectation of what a father figure represents on a deeper psychological level.
Exactly. And these powerful archetypes manifest in our dreams, revealing their often unconscious influence on our personality,
Wow.
playing a crucial role in that lifelong process of individuation,
Right, becoming whole.
the journey of becoming a whole, integrated self. Dreams can often compensate for our conscious attitudes and beliefs, offering valuable insights our waking mind might overlook or actively resist.
You mentioned a dream sequence of 80s that really seemed to bring these archetypal dynamics to life in a very compelling way.
Yes, 80. Initially, she dreamt of a quite terrifying, sadistic, inner demonic father figure.
Demonic. Wow.
Yeah, which strongly suggested a very negative, damaging internalization of the paternal aspect.
Mhm.
However, as her inner work progressed, her dreams evolved.
Okay.
Later dreams featured a more mischievous, playful, gremlin trickster figure with unusual powers,
A gremlin. Interesting.
and then a more overtly positive image of a good wizard actively facing and battling evil forces. This evolution in her dream imagery powerfully revealed 80's underlying unconscious strength
Ah.
and her potential for accessing inner resources and help,
Uh,
directly addressing the deep-seated lack of paternal support she'd experienced throughout her childhood and adolescence. So for you, it's a fascinating example of how the unconscious mind can work towards healing and balance.
It's really fascinating how the unconscious seems to be constantly trying to compensate for those early deficits and move towards greater wholeness.
It is.
Huh.
Jung himself believed the personal father inevitably embodies the archetypal father figure. And it's this connection to these powerful transpersonal images that explains why the father figure, even in absence, can wield such significant potential influence on a daughter's development.
Mhm.
The qualities traditionally associated with the father archetype: authority, establishing ideals and values, understanding social roles, appropriate use of personal power, are meant to be transmitted and adapted by the daughter through a present engaged father.
Right.
When that presence is lacking, it can create a significant void in how these aspects of the self are formed.
Now let's delve into a really interesting, perhaps less intuitively obvious consequence of father absence,
Mhm.
the development of what's called the as-if personality. What exactly are the key characteristics of this type of adaptation?
The as-if adaptation, as Schwartz describes it,
Yeah.
is essentially a defense mechanism.
Okay.
It develops through internal splits, dissociations within the psyche. It reflects a fundamental void where genuine feelings, authentic emotions should be. And this void is often masked by a carefully constructed veneer of superficial cheerfulness, what can appear as empty facades. There's often a noticeable lack of real passion, deep engagement with life.
Why is that?
Well, it stems from an unconscious avoidance of emotional depth, true vulnerability. Sometimes, however, significant life events can abruptly shatter this carefully constructed outer layer,
Right.
forcing the individual to finally confront their more authentic, perhaps long-neglected core self. So for you, it's about considering if the way someone presents outwardly always aligns with what might be going on internally.
So there's this outward presentation, this performance that doesn't really match the inner reality of their emotional experience.
Precisely. A daughter who has developed an as-if personality might achieve significant academic or professional success,
Right.
yet internally she might feel like a phony, constantly living in fear of being exposed as an imposter.
Well, that sounds stressful.
Terribly. She might present a sparkling, seemingly appealing exterior, yet underneath she feels porous, lacking in genuine self-value, living behind these carefully maintained facades out of a deep-seated fear of negative judgment or rejection.
Mm-hmm.
In these cases, true emotional closeness can become deeply threatening because it carries the inherent risk of revealing the perceived inadequacy within.
You mentioned that these defenses can eventually fail. What typically happens when that occurs?
Well, distress, even crisis, can occur when the outer methods of containing and managing the as-if personality become exhausted,
Right.
and the individual's inner reserves finally collapse under the strain. The bravado, the performance eventually come to an end.
Okay.
These failing defenses can manifest as noticeable physical and/or psychological changes, often accompanied by a significant sense of alarm, disorientation.
Mm.
Tiffany's experience provides a compelling illustration. Due to the lack of a trusting, emotionally available father figure early on, she was forced to grow up prematurely, unconsciously denying her fundamental childhood emotional needs. These unmet needs then resurfaced in adulthood as a kind of false maturity that thinly mask a more underlying, persistent infantile state.
Wow.
The lack of consistent paternal attention, genuine support for her intellectual and creative interests in her formative years had planted deep seeds of feeling fundamentally insufficient. So for you, it's a reminder that unmet childhood needs don't just disappear, they often find other ways to surface later in life.
It sounds like this as-if presentation is fundamentally a way of trying to navigate life and relationships without ever truly being seen for who you are at your core.
Exactly. By constantly putting on this performance, the genuine, deeply felt needs for love, authentic connection, true attention become obscured,
Right.
both of the individual themselves and of those around them. It's a mask worn so consistently it can become almost indistinguishable from the person's real self, often operating largely unconsciously.
Yeah.
This pattern can lead to profound feelings of inauthenticity, the deep sense of being fundamentally disconnected from the richness of real life, genuine human interaction. What might superficially appear to others as self-absorption or detached aloofness is often at its heart a deeply ingrained defense against the potential pain of true intimacy and honest interior reflection.
Right.
There's often an underlying sense of profound emptiness, a significant lack of genuine warmth and spontaneity, because the very authenticity of inner emotional experience, including the natural capacity to truly give and receive love, is significantly diminished or even missing altogether.
You shared some really poignant and illustrative examples of this as if personality in action, particularly with the experiences of Sydney and Sophia.
Yes, Sydney's subjective experience reflected this profound, pervasive psychic
The
deadness
psychic deadness.
that she traced back to her father's fundamental relational lack, emotional unavailability. She felt as though the carefully constructed image she presented was somehow more substantial, more real than her own inner self.
Wow.
Often describing herself as a performer, acutely aware of a central, persistent void within. She expressed deep ambivalence about truly accepting love, consistently struggled to process intense emotions.
Hmm.
Her primary focus and energy directed towards constantly pleasing others.
Right. And Sophia.
Sophia's experience further highlighted how significant emotional and physical neglect early in life can severely impact the development of the imaginative realm,
Okay.
making it incredibly difficult for the child to even consciously identify and name their profound sense of loss.
Hmm.
Locked in this constant internal battle, characterized by vicious self-attacks, stemming from what she experienced as a barren, unsupportive paternal presence.
Mm.
She would often present with outward emotional numbness in therapy that stood in stark contrast to the sudden, uncontrollable tears that would occasionally break through.
Mm.
She carried a deep, persistent feeling of aloneness, a fundamental sense of being off or different from others, which she directly attributed to a profound failure in that early, crucial paternal holding environment.
It's really heartbreaking to hear just how deeply this early lack of paternal connection and emotional attunement can affect a person's fundamental sense of self and their ability to authentically connect with others throughout their lives. And the idea of the grandiose self you mentioned with Sophia, that can also be a significant defense, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A grandiose self can emerge as a powerful, albeit ultimately fragile, form of magical protection.
Okay.
An image of an independent, even omnipotent self that seemingly needs no others, as direct compensation for the profound absence of early safety, security, consistent emotional mirroring.
Right. But there's a downside.
A big one. This significant loss of contact with an authentic, vulnerable self can unfortunately lead to shutting off from genuine connection with others.
Mm.
And when someone is profoundly estranged from their genuine emotional core, life can often begin to feel increasingly meaningless, ultimately futile.
Mm-hmm.
Sophia's deeply ingrained feeling of being like a stranger to her own father, constantly on the receiving end of his significant emotional deficiencies, eventually led to a marked disdain for her own physical instincts and a deep-seated shame surrounding her own sexuality, further fragmenting her already precarious sense of self and embodiment.
This all really underscores the profound, often lifelong need for a healthy, actively engaged paternal presence in those critical early stages of development. Let's shift focus now to the dialogue of therapy. It sounds like therapy can offer a really crucial transformative space for beginning to heal these very deep-seated wounds.
Indeed. Therapy provides a vital, safe environment for the daughter to embark on a journey of personal evolution
Okay.
and begin a crucial search for her own silenced self, those long neglected, perhaps forgotten desires within the safety and support of the therapeutic relationship.
Right.
Often, individuals enter therapy because of something they can't quite articulate or forget, a recurring, often painful narrative about their life that unfortunately often manifests in their current actions, relationship patterns.
Yeah, getting stuck.
Exactly. Creating a pervasive sense that time has somehow stopped or become stuck, developing a genuine sense of comfort and trust with oneself and others isn't easily learned or internalized without consistent, healthy paternal presence.
Mhm.
And the very creation of a solid sense of self can be profoundly impacted by early environmental failures, often leaving a significant, persistent void. Therapy offers a kind of container, as the insightful Andre Green suggested,
The container.
for both the patient and the therapist to mutually immerse themselves in these complex, often deeply painful issues.
And the unconscious, particularly through the powerful language of dreams, plays a really vital, often revealing role in this therapeutic process, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The unconscious mind becomes actively activated by the patient's underlying emotions. And dreams, as impartial, unfiltered products of the psyche, offer a remarkably clear window into the unvarnished natural truth of their inner world.
Right.
Dreams can reveal those fundamental emotional, developmental, psychological needs that are now urgently clamoring for conscious attention and integration.
Mm.
Addressing these long unmet needs is absolutely crucial for the individual to develop a more secure, resilient, solid sense of self in the world.
You mentioned Jean Knox's important concept of reflective function and Jung's profound idea of the transcendent function in the specific context of therapy. Could you elaborate a bit more on what those concepts entail?
Certainly, the reflective function, as defined by Knox, refers to an individual's fundamental capacity to be aware of their own internal states and the internal states of others.
Okay, self-awareness and other awareness.
Exactly. It's essentially an attitude of independent psychological and emotional reflection on the unfolding narrative of one's own life experiences. For the therapist, cultivating their own reflective function requires constant, dedicated focus on the often subtle, subjective, intuitive, symbolic narratives emerging within the session,
Right.
actively resonating with the patient's often contradictory threads of experience to co-construct a shared symbolic space where deeper understanding and insight can take root.
And the transcendent function.
The transcendent function, on the other hand, as described by Jung, is a more dynamic, transformative process. It's about intentionally bridging the often significant gap between the conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche
Okay.
by actively holding seemingly opposing forces in a state of dynamic interplay. This crucial process occurs both within the individual's inner world and within the evolving dynamic of the therapeutic relationship itself,
Okay.
ultimately leading to the emergence of new symbolic forms and a greater sense of inner psychic wholeness and integration.
So therapy really becomes this dynamic interplay between conscious and unconscious, and between the subjective experiences of both patient and therapist. And you also mentioned the crucial concepts of transference and countertransference.
Yes, the core of effective therapeutic work fundamentally arises from the dynamics of transference,
Right.
where the patient unconsciously transfers feelings, expectations, relational patterns from significant past relationships onto the figure of the therapist.
Mm.
Simultaneously, there's countertransference, which refers to the therapist's own, often unconscious emotional responses to the patient and their material.
Okay.
For a daughter who has experienced father absence, she might unconsciously project idealized or, conversely, overly critical paternal figures onto her female therapist.
Right. Makes sense.
Or she might harbor deep-seated expectations that the therapist will both perfectly meet and inevitably fail to meet the profound absence of the paternal she experienced.
Yeah.
A deep, ongoing understanding of these complex projective processes, as well as the therapist's own unresolved father issues, is absolutely crucial for effective work.
Right. The therapist needs self-awareness, too.
Absolutely. The therapeutic relationship can very easily, inevitably, reenact the patterns of the father's lack, bringing those early relational wounds into sharp focus.
Mm-hmm.
However, a positive, consistently attuned therapeutic relationship can also offer a powerful corrective emotional experience, gently unwrapping the often deeply embedded layers of emotional neglect and relational wounding, as we saw with Willow. This allows for gradual remembering of the broken connections between the self and the self, and between the self and others. Ultimately, as Jung astutely observed, analysis is not a one-way process, but definitely mutual, dialogical,
Right.
where a new kind of personal truth evolves through these complex, evolving interactions.
Let's move to a chapter with a very direct, thought-provoking title. If he loves her, where is he? This really seems to tackle that painful discrepancy between a father's supposed love and his actual physical or emotional absence.
This chapter delves into the often complex, sometimes controversial concept of the animus,
The animus.
which in its more traditional Jungian formulation has certainly been subject to much debate and critique over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Schwartz offers a more updated, nuanced perspective,
Okay.
viewing the animus not as a strictly gendered inner male aspect, but more broadly as representing the richness, potential, and inherent mystery of the other within the deeper layers of our unconscious processes.
So less about gender, more about otherness.
Exactly. It's really about the dynamic interplay between the so-called male and female, or perhaps more accurately, masculine and feminine energies within each individual. Recognizing these aren't fixed or static, but fluid and evolving. So for you, it's about considering the dynamic interplay of different energies within yourself and others, beyond rigid gender stereotypes.
So the animus isn't simply about an inner maleness for a woman, as it's sometimes traditionally understood.
Exactly. It encompasses the full spectrum of our intellectual capacities, mind, thought processes, our ability to experience and express a wide range of feelings and emotions,
Right.
and our inherent creative potential. Ultimately giving the daughter the psychological freedom to live authentically rather than feeling constrained by outdated conventions or restrictive patriarchal norms.
Okay.
Jung himself recognized the animus can manifest in ways that are either predominantly positive and creative or conversely more negative and destructive,
Right.
depending on the individual woman's conscious and unconscious relationship to it. The ultimate goal of integration, in this context, is about consciously adapting and working with this inner animus in a way that enriches her own unique personality, rather than being unconsciously subservient to its potentially limiting aspects.
And how does the specific experience of having an absent father typically impact the healthy development and integration of the animus in a daughter's psyche?
Well, the animus essentially holds the complex of feelings, beliefs, expectations about males that a daughter learns and internalizes from both parents.
Okay.
When a father is consistently unavailable, emotionally unsupportive, simply not present in a meaningful way, the daughter can experience significant disappointment, a lack of healthy models for dependency, mutual reliance,
Hmm.
and difficulty forming secure, loving relationships with men later. Durrell's experience provides a poignant illustration.
Oh, right.
Her primary adaptation to her father's profound absence
Yeah.
was to essentially go unconscious to his impact.
Trying to erase it.
Yeah, attempting to erase his influence, trying to make him not matter. Despite this conscious effort, she still felt deeply uncomfortable, ill at ease in her own skin, often experiencing hypervigilance, a constant sense of being guarded. When
Wow.
the father is emotionally absent or overtly negative, the development of a healthy integrated animus can become negatively charged, leading to internal conflicts that undermine the daughter's own instincts and authentic expressions of her individuality. So for you, it's about recognizing how early relational experiences shape our inner expectations and beliefs about others.
And dreams can again offer a valuable window into the workings of this negative animus, can't they?
They certainly can. Dreams featuring a predominantly negative animus often expose those critical, self-defeating inner demons that actively hinder the daughter's progress and well-being,
Right.
speaking in harsh, undermining inner voices.
Yeah.
Durrell, for example, had a recurring dream of a cold, ruthless mafia character killing without remorse,
Wow.
powerfully symbolizing her own internalized, destructive male forces, revealing a deep undercurrent of self-loathing rooted directly in her father's pervasive negativity and lack of affirmation.
Gosh.
Janita's dreams also clearly illustrated the negative impact of a poorly integrated animus. One vivid dream featured a male hairdresser aggressively pushing unwanted, unflattering changes on her,
Uh-oh.
mirroring her deeply ingrained expectation of being put down, revealing an internalized male figure who consistently failed to listen to or respect her preferences. Interestingly, her later dreams of being trapped in bed with both parents exposed the profound psychological impact her father had, despite her initial attempts to report his emotionally distant behavior in a seemingly dispassionate way.
Right.
The persistent presence of a negative animus can even manifest physically, as seen in Janita's severe allergies and debilitating anxiety. So for you, it's a reminder that our inner world can have very real, tangible effects on our physical well-being.
It's really striking how this internalized, often unconscious figure can exert such a powerful, ultimately damaging influence. Let's turn now to idealization of father illusion. Why is idealizing an absent father described as creating a tomb?
Idealization, in this specific context, functions as a powerful defense mechanism against the very painful reality of the father's absence or emotional unavailability.
Okay, a defense.
The daughter unconsciously creates a fantasy figure, an idealized image, which she then places on a pedestal, often overshadowing the actual, more complex reality of his behavior and limitations.
Right.
While this might offer temporary comfort, it ultimately becomes a kind of tomb because it actively prevents the daughter from seeing her father realistically, establishing healthy boundaries, and ultimately living her own authentic, fully realized life, free from the constraints of this unrealistic fantasy. So for you, it's about considering the potential pitfalls of putting anyone on too high a pedestal, especially in family relationships.
So this seemingly perfect, flawless image of the father actually becomes a significant barrier to genuine connection, both with him and with her own true self-awareness.
Precisely. Talisha's experience provides a clear example. Her bond with her absent father was largely constructed from loving images, a deep, often unspoken yearning for connection.
Right.
A yearning actually intensified by being told by others not to think about him or dwell on his absence.
Oh, interesting pressure.
Yeah. When she finally took the initiative to locate him as a young adult, after years of him not reaching out, she never really questioned his prolonged absence, having on some level given up on him finding her first. This act of her actively seeking him, instead of a more natural expectation of a parent initiating contact, already hints at an inhibited sense of her own self-agency and worth. Her years of privately imagining a kind of fairy tale father left her woefully unprepared for the reality of his personality, made her particularly vulnerable to his subsequent emotional intrusions and manipulations. So for you, it's a reminder that sometimes the stories we tell ourselves can actually keep us from seeing things as they truly are.
It sounds like she was almost trapped within this carefully constructed fantasy of who she wanted him to be.
She was. The more intensely she idealized him, clung to this perfect image, the more her own sense of vitality, inner strength gradually diminished. Yet she struggled to recognize and acknowledge his more manipulative tendencies. Jung's profound observation that nothing exerts a stronger, more often unconscious effect on children than the unlived life of the parent is particularly relevant here.
The unlived life. Powerful.
Yeah. She was carrying not only her own unfulfilled longings, but also the significant weight of her father's own unresolved issues and unmet potentials. Dreams, as Schwartz consistently highlights, serve as a powerful mirror, reflecting the often unconscious dynamics between our inner psyche and external reality. A significant dream of Kalisha's, where she confronted a beautiful blonde woman trying to steal her man, reflected her own deep wish for irresistible attractiveness.
Okay.
Heavily influenced by her mother's image and her father's past comparisons of women, ultimately masking Talisha's own underlying manipulative tendencies in relationships.
Wow.
The important task, both personally and often generationally, is to courageously demystify this idealized image of the absent father and begin to break free from the often unconscious repetition of limiting family patterns.
Now, the next chapter asks a very direct, perhaps challenging question. Do you want to be the daddy's girl? What are the deeper psychological implications of this label, particularly in the context of an absent or otherwise unhealthy father figure?
Right. The concept of the puella eterna, Latin for eternal girl, becomes very relevant.
Puella eterna.
It refers to a specific psychological complex characterized by a persistent desire in a woman to remain perpetually young, avoid adult responsibilities, commitments, and maintain a dependent, often idealized relationship with a father figure or broader patriarchal structures. While there might be an initial outward appearance of intense, almost childlike joyous energy, it often masks underlying fragility and unrealistic expectations about life and relationships. A significant aspect is a tendency towards self-abandonment, hindering the crucial psychological process of individuation, becoming a fully realized independent self. So for you, it's about considering the potential cost of clinging to a youthful or dependent role.
So this seemingly innocent desire to remain daddy's girl can actually be a significant form of arrested psychological development.
Exactly. The prela often unconsciously repeats the father's own patterns, personally and relationally, frequently engaging in a cycle of idealizing him, then experiencing inevitable deflation, disappointment.
Up and down.
Yeah, oscillating between superiority and underlying feelings of deep inferiority. There's often noticeable reliance on superficial rituals, external appearances, to maintain a youthful image, avoid deeper engagement with life's complexities.
Right.
The inner drive can stem from what James Hillman described as a kind of oral hunger for constant reassurance, attention, combined with often unconscious, omnipotent fantasies, but also deep underlying frustration with the real world's consistent inability to fully satisfy these unrealistic, often infantile needs. This can lead to a lack of genuine passion, persistent exhaustion from fruitless changes, as Hillman put it, constantly seeking, without ever truly finding fulfillment.
And there's also a significant shadow aspect to this Puella archetype, isn't there?
Yes, an inordinate, often unconscious identification with this eternal girl persona inevitably leads to forming a significant, largely unacknowledged shadow part of the personality.
The shadow.
The shadow, in Jungian terms, represents those necessary but often discomforting aspects of ourselves we tend to repress, deny, or try to escape. For the puella, this often means actively avoiding the essential inner work, emotional depth required for true, lasting individuation.
Okay.
When the psyche's inherent potential isn't consciously engaged and utilized, it can unfortunately become perverted or distorted. Often wrapped in denial, the puella is frequently obstructed from accessing her natural, healthy aggression, her own authentic desires,
Right.
which are absolutely essential for true self-knowledge, developing her unique talents, and the capacity for genuine reciprocal intimacy. So for you, it's a reminder that embracing all parts of ourselves, even the uncomfortable ones, is key to growth.
You shared Zoe's experience as a compelling example of the puella eterna complex in action. How did that manifest in her life?
Zoe consciously tried to please her often critical father by adopting the role of an adored, perpetually compliant daddy's girl, remaining consistently in service to what she perceived as the masculine ideal, feeling inherently less than in her own right. This fundamental split from her own authentic roots led to a kind of arrested psychological development,
Mm-hmm.
a subtle but significant rejection of the more instinctual physical aspects of her own being. She often described feeling like a ghost, somehow unseen, lacking genuine substance.
Wow.
In therapy, her actions and dreams suggested a persistent attempt to clear a kind of psychological fog related to an idealized inner father figure still reigning supreme in her unconscious.
Right.
She had, over years, allowed her father's often unspoken expectations to dictate many key areas of her life, leaving her own sense of independence, her unique passions largely unformed, undeveloped.
Hmm.
Even as a talented violinist with significant potential, she ultimately let her burgeoning career lapse in favor of her husband's, feeling her own inner spark gradually disappear.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah. Her deep-seated loyalty to her father, combined with a more distant, often fraught relationship with her mother, created significant ambivalence, underlying conflict around the very idea of love and intimacy.
Right.
Remaining daddy's girl, as she had unconsciously chosen, ultimately meant betraying her own authentic self and potential. The original wounds stemmed from early experiences of loss, subtle rejections, and insufficient early holding environment, leaving her with a persistent, pervasive feeling of fundamental insufficiency. So for you, it's a powerful illustration of how trying to please others can sometimes lead us to lose sight of ourselves.
It really sounds like she was caught in this intricate, ultimately self-defeating web of constantly trying to please her father at the significant expense of her own well-being and genuine psychological development.
Precisely. The dream dynamics emerging in her analysis further revealed the complex underlying problems preventing her from fully leaving her childhood home,
Hmm.
highlighting the often unconscious, intensely powerful bond she still maintained with her father, a bond increasingly called into question by his own lack of genuine emotional support and affirmation. Ultimately, the puella eterna represents significant instinctive preconscious potential.
Right.
But when an individual becomes stuck in this developmental phase, she can remain in a kind of suspended animation, unable to be fully present in her own life, truly embrace her own authentic self.
The next chapter, Behind the Mask and the Glitter, a Narcissistic Response, delves into a very different, yet equally challenging, psychological outcome of experiencing father absence. How does the development of narcissistic traits relate to this particular family dynamic?
Schwartz proposes that narcissism, characterized by a significant sense of impenetrability, a fundamental pattern of distancing from one's own true self and from genuine connection with others,
Okay.
is often significantly exacerbated by paternal absences, particularly when coupled with other forms of early relational wounding. It's absolutely crucial to understand this is typically not about healthy self-love or self-acceptance,
Right. Important distinction.
but rather often masks deep-seated, often unconscious self-hate, encompassing feelings of intense envy, unwarranted entitlement, underlying anger, profound internal disappointments. The individual's true, authentic self is often lost or deeply buried beneath layers of defensive grandiosity. Individuals with narcissistic traits often harbor a deep, often unconscious fear of genuine transformation.
Why?
Because true love, reciprocal relationships inevitably force those carefully avoided core issues to the surface, threatening their fragile sense of self. So for you, it's important to understand that what might appear as excessive self-love can often be a cover for deeper insecurities.
So the mask and glitter, the outward show, are ultimately a way of concealing this underlying inner turmoil and vulnerability.
Exactly. Developing a seemingly perfected, idealized surface persona serves as a protective barrier, designed to conceal the often painful inner figure's feelings of inadequacy. As Jung astutely observed, relationship to the self is at once relationship to our fellow man, powerfully highlighting how a fundamentally distorted or fractured relationship with one's inner world inevitably significantly impacts one's ability to form healthy, reciprocal relationships.
Makes sense.
Narcissism, in this context, can be understood as a kind of portrayal of a psychic state of illusory oneness that ultimately eliminates the possibility of genuine otherness, true connection. Underneath the often superficial charm and grandiosity, there's often a deep, raw tenderness that simply doesn't trust the possibility of truly opening up, being vulnerable with others.
Right.
The overriding, often unconscious question driving much of the narcissistic behavior becomes, if I'm not exceptional and perfect, then what am I? What is my inherent worth?
You use the ancient Greek myth of Narcissus and Echo to poignantly illustrate this particular psychological dynamic.
Yes, the myth beautifully, tragically portrays the core dynamic. Narcissus, completely fixated on his own reflection, his idealized self-image, utterly rejects the genuine longing, heartfelt attempts at connection from the nymph Echo.
Right.
Ultimately, both figures end up losing their capacity for true connection with another living being, tragically trapped within their own separate, self-absorbed realities.
Wow.
This powerfully mirrors the profound isolation often experienced by individuals with narcissistic traits who often belong only to their own carefully constructed idealized self-image, ultimately unable to truly engage with another person meaningfully and reciprocally.
Evie's personal experience provided a really compelling and relatable example of this narcissistic response in the context of father absence, didn't it?
Yes, Evie harbored deep-seated, often painful memories of being consistently unacknowledged, emotionally unseen by a father she experienced as tyrannical, fundamentally unavailable to her emotional needs. As a way to cope, she developed a secret, powerful inner image of herself as a lone heroine, someone inherently strong, capable, destined to rescue others.
Oh, the rescuer.
Yeah, perhaps mirroring a desire to rescue the unloving parent or the wounded child within herself.
Yeah.
This persistent underlying need for recognition, the secret grandiose self-image, both stemmed from her core feelings of helplessness, depression, profound sorrow in relation to her father's emotional distance.
Right.
In a revealing dream, she found herself on a tennis team being unfairly, harshly criticized by a demanding male coach despite performing well.
Okay.
A dream image powerfully mirroring her actual relationship dynamic with her often critical, unappreciative father.
Mm-hmm.
Schwartz emphasizes that at the very heart of narcissistic patterns is often a profound lack of genuine warmth, empathic connection.
Mm-hmm.
Much like Narcissus not recognizing the real self in his reflection, a genuine integrated inner experience of self is often missing. The insightful Julia Kristeva refers to this core deficit as a form of alienation,
Alien.
a fundamental splitting off of the self from deeply repressed, disowned feelings, which can often drive a person to wander aimlessly in their emotional life, constantly seeking external validation to fill an internal void.
It really sounds like Evie's outward grandiosity, her secret self-image as this capable heroine, was fundamentally a defensive shield erected to protect herself from the deep-seated pain of feeling unseen and unloved by her own father.
Precisely. The experience of not being responded to genuinely, validate me, or constantly feeling emotionally threatened or criticized triggered her deeply hidden wounds
Right.
and led her to unconsciously adopt her father's own negative, critical internal language towards herself. Even though she consciously rejected his negative behaviors, her soul still cried out for that fundamental essential early connection and validation. A recurring significant dream of Evie's, where she consciously refused her father's negative influence, instead chose to take a higher road, suggested a glimmer of hope for her to move away from his damaging patterns.
Okay, some hope there.
Right. However, another recurring dream of her unconsciously committing a crime reflected her own inner sense of self-betrayal and underlying grandiosity. Ultimately, the significant failure in the early paternal holding environment can often result in developing these complex narcissistic responses, frequently rooted in deep, often unacknowledged feelings of insecurity and inadequacy.
Right.
For someone with these tendencies, genuine intimacy can feel incredibly threatening because it exposes their perceived flaws, endangers their carefully constructed, insulated inner world.
Our final main discussion point takes us into a very embodied, perhaps less obviously connected realm. The body in shadow. How does the absence or negative presence of a father potentially manifest in a daughter's physical well-being?
Schwartz emphasizes a fundamental principle of Jungian psychology. Body and psyche are not separate,
Right. Interconnected.
but deeply interconnected. Illness, therefore, can often serve as a powerful reflection of underlying, unacknowledged inner psychological states and conflicts. In Radha's case, for example, her experience of chronic illness seemed to unconsciously recreate the early feelings of isolation, profound abandonment she'd experienced in childhood due to her father's significant emotional unavailability, lack of attunement.
Wow.
A deep psychic void resulting from the utter loss of a truly engaged father figure manifested internally, depressively, as persistent inner emptiness. Her fundamental longing for consistent closeness, secure acceptance from him, had largely gone unmet.
Mm.
This pattern of disconnection from her own physical body, or persistent feeling of not being fully embodied in her own life, can often indicate the presence of a disregarded, consequently weakened sense of self.
So in a very real sense, the body can hold and express the unexpressed emotions and unresolved experiences stemming from this early paternal
Oh,
absence.
absolutely. Autoimmune diseases, for instance, can sometimes expose underlying, previously denied fragility, those dissociated parts of the self pushed away or ignored. There's often a pervasive silence surrounding women's capacity, willingness to openly talk about their own bodies, physical experiences.
Hmm.
And sometimes, even within therapy, this significant silence can persist.
Hmm.
Disturbances in sleep patterns, imbalanced eating habits, chronic digestive issues can also signify a fundamental disconnect between body and psyche, often reflecting a kind of internal violence or unresolved conflict.
Yeah.
For Rana, her autoimmune disease brought a profound realization of her own early denied vulnerability, a pervasive sense of melancholia, a kind of non-communicable grief,
Melancholia.
characterized by persistent sadness, a fundamental feeling of being off, disconnected from others. Her persistent feeling of living outside her own skin poignantly indicated a deep lack of ownership, integration with her own physical being.
Right.
Drawing on Julie Kristeva's work, Schwartz also highlights that a crucial aspect of forming a healthy identity involves recognizing, integrating our own inner strangeness, those parts that might feel unfamiliar or uncomfortable.
Inner strangeness.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Kristeva's theory of objection further suggests the existence of a deeply repressed zone of disgust, otherness within the self, which can become particularly entangled with the daughter's sense of her body in the context of unresolved trauma related to paternal absence or neglect. So for you, it's a powerful reminder to pay attention to what your body might be trying to communicate about your inner emotional landscape.
It's a really powerful and important reminder of just how deeply intertwined our physical and emotional well-being truly are. And it sounds like coming to a greater awareness and acceptance of this body and shadow is often a crucial step in the overall healing process.
It absolutely is.
Mm.
The concluding chapter, appropriately titled Filling the Absence, focuses specifically on the intricate, often challenging process of healing from the profound, far-reaching effects of the absent father.
Okay, healing.
This healing journey inevitably involves a deep, often lengthy inner process that includes fully grieving the significant loss, developing a comprehensive understanding of its lasting impact. Therapy provides a uniquely supportive, contained space to carefully negotiate those often repetitive, ultimately empty cycles of relating, and to gradually let go of long-held illusions,
Mm.
fostering the development of a more nourishing, compassionate internal dialogue, the capacity for healthier, more reciprocal relationships. The ultimate goal, in Jungian terms, is individuation,
Right, becoming whole again.
the lifelong journey of becoming a whole, integrated, unique self through consistent inner reflection, self-awareness, courageous examination of past wounds, unresolved conflicts.
Yeah,
It's important to emphasize this journey isn't necessarily solely about achieving perpetual happiness,
good point.
but rather about cultivating a wider, more compassionate perspective on oneself and one's life experiences. It's also crucial to remember fathers themselves are often deeply affected by their own patterns of absence
Right.
and can also embark on their own journeys of learning to build more complete, fulfilling relationships with their daughters if that becomes possible.
Hmm.
The human psyche, in its inherent wisdom, naturally seeks balance, ongoing expansion. And the realm of the imagination holds significant, often untapped healing properties.
Right.
Rather than simply suffering the perceived lack, the daughter has the inherent capacity to actively weave her own unique life narrative.
Hmm.
One that honors her own deeply felt feelings, cultivates a stronger, more trusting connection to her own inner wisdom.
Yeah.
Jungian analysis in particular offers a valuable framework for working through the often deeply entrenched defenses, resistances that can keep an individual stuck in past patterns.
Okay.
Victoria's significant dream of consciously drawing potent dream images up from a deep web and realm powerfully symbolized her growing ability to access previously rejected, disowned parts of herself.
Nice image.
Another of her dreams, featuring a compelling combination of old, familiar books alongside modern digital devices, beautifully represented her continued enthusiasm for knowledge, a resilient sense of hope for the future, even in the enduring context of her father's absence. So for you, it's about recognizing your own inherent capacity for healing and growth, even in the face of significant early loss.
So ultimately, it's a transformative journey then, reclaiming one's own narrative, finding a sense of inner wholeness, building a fulfilling life, even in the context of significant early loss and the ongoing impact of an absent father.
Precisely. It's a gradual process of moving away from feelings of despair, deprivation, and into a state of greater curiosity, self-inquiry, and ultimately profound self-acceptance and ongoing personal growth.
We have certainly covered a tremendous amount of really insightful ground in this deep dive into Susan Schwartz's profound work, The Absent Father Effect on Daughters. To briefly summarize some of the key takeaways for you, the listener, we've explored how father absence, which goes far beyond mere physical distance, can create deep, lasting psychological wounds,
Right.
significantly impacting feelings of fundamental loss and longing, powerfully shaping the daughter's often complex, ambivalent desire for a father figure,
Hmm.
and potentially leading to negative self-perceptions, limiting beliefs.
Yeah.
We've also examined how deeply ingrained archetypal patterns and the often unconscious defense mechanisms of the as-if personality can take root as ways of coping,
Hmm.
and even how this profound absence can somatically manifest in the daughter's physical body. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, we touched on the significant transformative potential of engaged, insightful therapy and the ongoing lifelong journey towards greater psychological individuation and wholeness.
And what becomes really fascinating to consider now is, well, the prevalence of these silent stories within your own life and the
Yeah.
lives of those around you. How might seemingly less dramatic early relational dynamics, perhaps even those that don't involve overt physical absence, be subtly and powerfully shaping present-day experiences, emotional responses, fundamental perceptions of self and others?
Good question.
What unseen fathers or other significant figures of influence might continue to resonate within the deeper layers of the unconscious? And what potentially transformative insights might be revealed by turning a more curious, compassionate, and courageous gaze inward?
This deep dive has really only just begun to scratch the surface of the rich, insightful wisdom in Susan Schwartz's important work.
Absolutely.
We would absolutely encourage you to explore the absent father effect on daughters further and to really take some time to reflect on the complex concepts and poignant examples we've discussed today.
Hmm.
Gaining a deeper understanding of these intricate, often unspoken dynamics can be an incredibly powerful, ultimately healing step towards greater self-awareness, increased self-compassion, and a more authentic and fulfilling way of being in the world.